Today, we follow a girl who gave everything she had and received something no one could ever steal. This isn't just a story, it's a heartbeat, and it might just change the way you see the world. The cold that morning was biting, not the kind of chill that simply nipped at your skin, but the kind that worked its way into your bones and stayed there. In a narrow alley behind a closed market in the outskirts of the city, a young girl named Elena curled herself against the stone wall, knees hugged tightly to her chest. She was 14, small for her age, barefoot, and wearing a tattered gray dress that once belonged to a donation bin. Her only possession, a frayed wool blanket, was wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Elena had no family. Her mother died giving birth. Her father, a miner, was crushed during a tunnel collapse. There was no extended family willing to take her in. She'd been passed between temporary shelters and foster homes until the system gave up. At 10, she learned that being quiet kept you from being hurt. At 11, she learned that hunger was constant. At 13, she stopped crying. She survived by collecting recyclables and helping vendors clean up after the market closed. Sometimes they gave her leftover bread. Other days, she found rotten fruit in the bins behind the stalls. She didn't complain. She never asked for more. Complaining got you noticed, and getting noticed usually led to things worse than hunger. That morning, as vendors packed their trucks and lights dimmed across the lot, Elena noticed someone she hadn't seen before. An old man, hunched over in ragged clothes, sat against a pole near the dumpsters. His hands were shaking. His feet, bare and swollen, stuck out from beneath a torn trench coat. His eyes were shut tight like he was bracing against death. Elena watched him for a moment. Her first instinct was to keep walking. The world didn't stop for people like her, or him. But something inside her paused. Maybe it was the way his shoulders trembled, or the way his breath fogged in small, uneven bursts. Maybe it was the memory of her own father, how his hands shook before he left that morning and never came back. Elena looked down at her only possession, the blanket. It had been her shield for 4 winters. Her mother's scent was long gone, but her warmth remained in the weave. Giving it away felt like cutting the last string connecting her to a life that wasn't all pain. She hesitated. Then, in one motion, she unfolded it and wrapped it around his shoulders. The man's eyes fluttered open, pale, cloudy, and confused, but he blinked. He saw her. "Why?" he rasped. Elena shook her head. "You looked cold." She stood, backed away, and returned to her corner behind the dumpsters. The wind hit harder without the blanket. Her thin arms wrapped around herself, trying to replace what she'd just given. But there was no regret, just the kind of aching quiet that feels heavier than words. That night sleep didn't come, not for her, and not for the man. He watched her from where he sat, pulling the blanket tighter around his shoulders. His breath grew more stable. His eyes stayed open, alert now, as if the world had just shifted under his feet. Morning came. The sky turned from gray to gold and market workers started arriving. Elena didn't wake up. She wasn't asleep, just still, unmoving, exhausted beyond dreams. The old man stood, slowly, painfully. He hobbled over to her spot and looked down at the girl who had given him warmth without asking for anything in return. He pulled a card from inside his coat. It was dirty, bent at the corners, but the gold emblem at the center gleamed faintly in the sun. He looked at her again. "I won't forget," he whispered. "I promise you that." Then he walked out of the alley into the awakening city, disappearing among the crowd. Elena stirred, unaware she'd just changed her life, but she didn't know it yet, not yet. 2 days passed. Elena hadn't seen the old man again. She assumed he had wandered off or, worse, died somewhere quiet. It wouldn't be the first time. People disappeared all the time out here. No names, no stories, just gone. She didn't let herself dwell on it. Her focus was food, warmth, and staying invisible. But on the morning of the 3rd day, something changed. A white van pulled into the alley, Clean, polished, it didn't belong. Vendors turned their heads, even the stray dogs backed off. The side door slid open, and a tall man in a gray wool coat stepped out. He was well-groomed, middle-aged, and looked like someone who'd never walked this kind of street. He scanned the alley, then walked straight to where Elena sat, chewing a crust of bread she'd bargained for with 2 crushed cans. "It's all right," he said, raising his hand slightly. "You're not in trouble. Someone sent me. A man you helped a few nights ago. He said you gave him your blanket." Her breath caught. The man continued, his voice calm. "He asked me to bring you somewhere safe, if you'd like." Elena looked around. A few vendors watched curiously, but no one moved. No one interfered. This was her decision alone. The man smiled faintly. "Because you were kind when no one else was." He said that meant something. She hesitated. Her whole body screamed not to trust him. She'd seen too many girls disappear after stepping into cars. But something about this man, his steady eyes, his lack of urgency, felt different. He wasn't pressuring her, just waiting. She nodded barely. They drove out of the city, past the rusting factories, past the broken neighborhoods. Trees started to line the roads, then fences, then wide-open land that looked untouched by struggle. An hour later, they pulled up to a quiet stone house on a hill. It wasn't huge, but it was warm, beautiful, and surrounded by silence. A woman in her 60s greeted them at the door. She wore a dark green sweater and had eyes that smiled before her lips did. "You must be Elena," she said softly. "Come in, you're safe here." Elena stepped into the house. The smell of stew hit her first, then the heat, then the cushions, the fire, the polished floor. Everything was too much, too soft, too new. She didn't speak much that first night. She ate, she bathed, she cried silently under clean sheets. No one asked questions. No one touched her without asking. No one raised their voice. For the first time in years, Elena slept. The days that followed passed gently. The woman, whose name was Ruth, explained that she ran a quiet home for girls with nowhere to go. Only a few stayed at a time. No one was forced to talk. They healed in their own time. Elena learned how to sweep the hallway, how to wash dishes without breaking them. She read her first book cover to cover. She helped plant vegetables in the garden. At first, she flinched at every loud noise, but slowly the tension inside her eased. One evening, as she sat by the window, Ruth handed her a folded note. It was from him, written in shaky handwriting. "Dear Elena, you reminded me what grace looks like. I wasn't just cold that night. I was lost. But your kindness, it brought me back. You gave everything when you had nothing. This house, this place, it's yours now, as long as you need it, and when you're ready, I'll be waiting." Elena stared at the note. The paper trembled in her hand. She didn't understand the full meaning yet, but one thing was clear: she had been seen. And for the first time, hope wasn't just an idea. It had a face, a warmth, and a place she could finally call home. The healing had begun. Spring crept in gently. Elena woke each morning to the chirping of birds and the scent of herbs from the garden. Sunlight stretched through linen curtains and pooled on the wooden floor. For the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid to open her eyes. Life at the home settled into a rhythm. There were chores, yes, but they were never shouted at her. She helped set the table, folded laundry, and slowly became someone the other girls turned to when they needed quiet strength. Ruth had a way of guiding them all like a silent conductor, never loud, never forceful, but always present. In the afternoons, they took walks through the field, and Elena began to sketch again. She had always drawn on scraps of cardboard when she was on the street, broken faces, city lines. But now her drawings were filled with trees, stars, hands that held things instead of letting go. One particular day, while sketching in the back garden, she noticed someone new. A young man, probably in his early 20s, was unloading crates of books from a van parked near the barn. He wasn't handsome in a movie star way, but there was something warm and solid about him. Kind eyes, quiet confidence. He caught her watching and smiled. "You must be Elena," he said, walking over. "Ruth told me you were the one who fixed the kitchen drawer." Elena blinked. I just tightened a hinge." "Well, she called it a miracle. I'm Jonah. I help out around here when I can." She nodded, unsure what to say. Jonah didn't push the conversation. He simply gestured toward her sketchbook. "You're good. That tree looks like it's breathing." Elena looked down at the drawing. It wasn't finished, but she mumbled a quiet thanks. Over the next few weeks, Jonah showed up more often. Sometimes he was fixing a fence, other days helping Ruth with paperwork. And sometimes he just sat in the garden reading quietly while Elena drew nearby. He never asked personal questions. He never treated her like a charity case. One rainy evening, they both found themselves in the small library Ruth kept. The power flickered. Thunder rolled outside. Jonah looked up from his book. "Storms used to scare me as a kid, but then my dad told me thunder is just the sky telling stories louder than we do." Elena smiled faintly. "I used to think thunder meant someone up there was angry." He tilted his head. "And now, I think maybe it's just noise, and it passes." Jonah nodded, then passed her a small leather-bound journal. "For your drawings, it's blank. Thought you might like something better than the back of receipts." Elena hesitated. Her instinct was to refuse. It felt too nice. But his gesture was simple. No strings. She took it. "Thanks," she said, her voice steadier this time. "Anytime." As days turned into weeks, their conversations grew deeper. Elena found herself laughing again. Once during dinner, Jonah made a bad pun and she laughed so hard she cried. Ruth simply smiled, saying nothing, as if she'd known all along what laughter could fix. One afternoon, while Jonah was cleaning paintbrushes in the shed, Elena joined him. They stood in comfortable silence until she said, "You're different from people I knew before." He looked at her gently. "You mean the ones who hurt you?" She didn't answer, but her silence was loud enough. Jonah placed a hand near hers, not touching, just close enough to let her feel his presence. "I'm not here to fix you, Elena," he said softly. "Just to know you if you'll let me." Her eyes welled, not from sadness, but from the shock of kindness offered without demand. She nodded, and in that simple gesture a new chapter began, not loud, not grand, but honest. For the first time, Elena felt something she couldn't name. It wasn't safety. She already had that. It was peace. Summer came early that year. The fields turned gold. The garden swelled with vegetables, and laughter echoed often through the stone house on the hill. Jonah and Elena had grown closer, an unspoken understanding blooming between them like the wildflowers along the fence. They didn't call it love, not yet, but everyone around them saw it. Even Ruth, who said nothing, simply nodded more often when their names came up together. Then, one afternoon, a black luxury car pulled up the long dirt path. It was sleek, out of place in this quiet world, the kind of car that didn't stop unless it had business. A man stepped out, young, polished, confident. He wore a tailored suit and sunglasses too expensive for the dust-covered road. A woman followed him, elegant, with sharp eyes and a perfect smile that didn't reach them. Ruth met them at the door. Elena watched from the window, a strange knot forming in her stomach. "We're looking for Elena," the man said, his tone polite but firm. Ruth's eyes narrowed slightly. "May I ask why?" "We represent someone with interest in her future." Jonah stepped outside before Ruth could respond. He kept his voice calm. "She doesn't need more strangers making promises." The man smiled, unfazed. "You must be the handyman." Jonah didn't flinch. "And you must be mistaken if you think she's a prize to collect." The woman stepped forward. "We're not here to hurt her. In fact, quite the opposite. We'd like to offer her an opportunity, one she's earned." Inside, Elena heard the voices rising. She stepped out. "Elena," she said. They turned to her instantly. The woman softened her smile. "Hello, dear. We're from a foundation, very private, very exclusive. One of our benefactors heard your story and was deeply moved. He'd like to sponsor your education, move you into the city, art school, travel, everything." Elena blinked. "Why me?" The man stepped in. "Because you did something extraordinary, and people like that deserve to shine. We believe you could be much more than this place." Jonah said nothing, but Elena could feel his gaze, steady and grounded beside her. "You'd have your own room, mentors, a future," the woman continued. "You don't owe anyone here anything." Elena looked down at her hands, rough from garden work, smudged with charcoal. She thought of Ruth's stew, Jonah's quiet jokes, the warmth she found again after years of cold. The woman stepped closer. "What's keeping you here truly? A place like this can't hold you forever." Elena lifted her eyes. "No, it can't, but it taught me how to stand, and that's something I won't trade for glitter." The man exhaled sharply. "This isn't glitter, this is legacy." Jonah finally spoke. "Legacies built on debt aren't worth inheriting." The woman's smile tightened. "Think carefully, offers like this don't wait." Elena looked at Jonah. He didn't speak, he didn't push, he just waited like he always had. And in that silence, Elena heard her answer clearly. She turned back to the strangers. "Tell your benefactor thank you, but my answer is no." The man frowned. "You're making a mistake. Maybe, but at least it'll be mine." They left without another word. As the car disappeared down the hill, Jonah sat beside her on the porch step. Elena looked out over the fields. "They made it sound beautiful," Jonah nodded. "Temptation always does." She leaned her head on his shoulder, still scared. "So am I," he said. "But we'll figure it out, together." And the sunset cast long shadows over the porch as two people chose something harder but real. It happened quietly. A letter arrived one crisp autumn morning, hand-delivered in a cream envelope with gold trimming. Ruth found it on the doorstep and passed it to Elena without a word. The seal on the back was unfamiliar, embossed with the initials HM. Elena opened it slowly, fingers trembling slightly. "Dear Elena, I've watched from afar as promised, and I've seen your heart remain steady despite the world's attempts to sway it. I think it's time we met again. There's something I need to tell you, something I should have told you sooner. Come to the winter house. Jonah knows the way." Elena looked up. Jonah had walked in just moments earlier. His eyes landed on the letter in her hand. He nodded slowly, almost like he'd been expecting it. Jonah took a deep breath. "Come, I'll take you." The winter house sat at the edge of a vast forest, white stone, wrapped in ivy and memory. It was the kind of place that held silence like a cathedral. Jonah drove her there without speaking, his knuckles pale on the steering wheel. When they arrived, he walked her to the door but didn't follow her inside. "He's waiting," he said simply. Elena stepped into the warmth. The house smelled like cedar and old books. Fire crackled softly in the fireplace, and there he was, the old man from the alley. But he wasn't ragged now. He wore a navy sweater and sat in a leather chair with quiet dignity. His beard was trimmed. His eyes, no longer clouded, were sharp and deeply familiar. Elena froze. He stood slowly. "Hello, Elena," her voice caught in her throat. "I thought you were homeless." "I was for a while," he smiled gently. "By choice." She blinked. "I don't understand." He gestured for her to sit. "I'm Henry Mercer, retired CEO of Mercer Holdings. Billionaire, yes, but also a father who lost his way. I left it all behind after my son died. I needed to remember who I was without power, without walls." Elena stared. The name clicked. Mercer. It was in the newspapers, on buildings. "I thought I'd disappear," he continued. "And then one winter night a girl gave me the only thing she had, a blanket. No questions, no pity, just grace." Elena's eyes welled. Henry looked at her, voice soft. "You saved me, not just from cold, but from bitterness." He leaned forward. "And Jonah, he's my grandson, my son's boy." Elena gasped. Her heart skipped. Jonah knew. Not at first, but I told him in time. Asked him to help me understand you, protect you, not interfere. He followed you because he believed in you, not because I asked. Elena sat back overwhelmed. So the offer, the car. Wasn't me, Henry said firmly. I never sent them. They worked for someone else who wanted to claim you. I rejected their ideas. You didn't need rescuing. You needed time. Elena shook her head slowly, trying to breathe through the flood of revelations. I don't want your money, she whispered. Henry nodded. I know. That's why I want to give you something else. He stood, walked to a drawer, and returned with a small velvet box. Inside was a key. This house, it's yours not as a gift, but as a place that's always open to you, for art, for rest, for healing. No cameras, no announcements, just a door you can close behind you. Elena stared at the key. Henry added quietly, I may have wealth, but you have something rarer, integrity. The fire crackled. Elena didn't cry, not then. She just nodded quietly, respectfully. Because for the first time, someone powerful didn't try to change her. They simply saw her. Winter pressed in quietly around the hill house. Snow fell in soft layers, blanketing the world in white. Inside the warm kitchen, Elena stirred a pot of stew while Jonah split firewood outside. The wind rattled the windows, but inside there was only peace. She hadn't used the key yet, the one Henry gave her. It sat in her drawer, beside a pencil she loved, and a dried flower Ruth had given her when she first arrived. It wasn't that she didn't want the house. It was that she didn't want it to mean the end of this life. This quiet, hard-earned simplicity. She still needed Ruth's humming in the hallway, Jonah's quiet laugh at the dinner table. But something had shifted, not just in her world, but in her heart. One evening, while walking the snowy path behind the house, she turned to Jonah. It wouldn't be like here. It'd be small. We'd start from nothing. I don't want to live in Henry's wealth. I want to build something of our own. Jonah smiled. Then we'll start with a blank wall and a hammer they left in early spring. Not with fanfare, not with speeches, just 2 bags, a few sketchbooks, and Ruth's blessing. They found a small apartment above an old bookstore in a quiet town near the coast. The rent was low, and the windows creaked, but light flooded the rooms and seagulls sang at dawn. Jonah took a job repairing bicycles. Elena painted in the mornings and worked at the bookshop in the afternoons. They cooked simple meals. They argued gently over grocery lists. They made their own coffee instead of buying it. Their home smelled like salt and ink and toast. It was not glamorous, but it was theirs. And slowly, something sacred grew between them, not born of rescue or wealth or tragedy, but of ordinary days spent choosing each other. One evening, Elena hung a small painting above their kitchen table. It was the first one she'd made in the new apartment. A simple scene of an alley, a girl, and a man wrapped in a blanket. Jonah looked at it for a long moment. You still remember? He asked softly. I always will, she said. Because what started with loss, with cold, with abandonment, had led to warmth, to love, to something real. She didn't need to prove anything, not to Henry, not to the world, not even to herself. She had already chosen what mattered most, and together they were building it day by day. Word travels in strange ways. A local newspaper ran a story about a young woman artist whose paintings of street life and forgotten people began drawing attention. Her name was small in the article, just Elena, but it found its way into the inboxes and group chats of people she had long left behind. One evening, as Elena closed the bookshop, a voice called her name. She turned. It was Mrs. Hanley, her former foster caretaker, the one who had thrown her out after accusing her of stealing coins that had never existed. She looked thinner now, older. Her scarf was frayed. Her smile was uncertain. Elena, she said, clutching her purse with both hands. It's really you. I saw the article. I didn't know where to find you. Elena held her silence, eyes calm. Things have been hard. My son's in trouble. And I I remembered how kind you were even after everything. I thought maybe you could help us." There it was, not quite an apology, not quite a plea, just need wrapped in a paper-thin layer of politeness. Elena nodded slowly. "I'm sorry to hear that." Mrs. Hanley stepped closer. "You've come so far, I always knew you had it in you." "No," Elena said gently. "You didn't. You called me a burden and told me no one would care if I disappeared." Mrs. Hanley's face fell. "Not angry," Elena continued, "but I've learned the difference between helping and being used. I can wish you peace, but I can't fix your past or mine." She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded card, the name of a local shelter printed on the front. "They can help you," Elena said. Mrs. Hanley took the card with shaking hands. "You're different now." "No," Elena replied. "I'm just finally safe enough to have boundaries." Thank you for joining us here on Hearts Without Words. If this story moved you, take a breath, sit in the silence, and remember, some of the most powerful acts in life are the ones no one sees. Don't forget to subscribe, share with someone who needs hope today, and join us next time for another story that speaks without shouting. Because sometimes the heart doesn't need a voice, it just needs to be heard. Welcome to Hearts Without Words, where silence speaks louder than screams, and kindness leaves echoes long after the world has forgotten your name. Each story here is a quiet revolution of resilience, dignity, and love born in the shadows.